All right, good morning, everyone. Today is Friday, April 5th, and this is a meeting of the Policy Committee. I'm going to share my screen, and we're going to begin with Policy 200. Recently, the state of Pennsylvania has done a great job of thinking about the challenges of military families, and you'll see in several of these 200-level policies that they've provided some accommodations that allow military families who experience some challenges to be able to have an easier time as they enroll their children. It's also the case that they've been looking at children in homelessness and foster care and other forms of educational instability, and make sure that their enrollment is as smooth as possible. So in a relatively minor change to Policy 200, the enrollment of students, they've provided these two additional exceptions. So students experiencing educational instability and children of active duty military families essentially being given some extra accommodation in their enrollment. And I wanted to let you know that, where families meet either of these subgroups, we have been working and will continue to work to enroll them based on the criteria that don't include proof of residency, which is normally required. And so Dr. Lutz, as you know, really is at the lead of this work. She happens to be away on a long weekend vacation, much deserved. And so I'm going to be covering this area for her. But I'm happy to answer any questions you might have. This is the extent of the Policy 200 adjustments to our current policy. Are there any questions or comments or concerns about these adjustments? So far, so good?
I have none at this time.
Okay, thank you. All right, so then I'll go to Policy 202. Policy 202 is very similarly amended under the new PSBA guidelines to provide accommodation for students in a few different situations. So in particular, there's an interstate compact on educational opportunities for military children, for students who register through an affidavit, which we call support gratis. And so we are recommending that we remove the section that currently exists, and I'll scroll down so you can see that. We have a section on prospective residents. This often creates confusions for new families, and there are a variety of reasons why leases and home agreements can fall through, and then it becomes incumbent on the district to follow through and investigate residency. Furthermore, the former students section is updated to include language for seniors to remain with or without tuition based on their circumstances. So I wanted to show you here, we wanted to make sure that when a student is moving, most of the time through through circumstances that they would not have any control over. When the student is completing their senior year and they're going to graduate and they've been enrolled since the 9th grade, we want to let them complete their final semester without the payment of tuition. And then if they're enrolled after their 9th grade year, we also still want to allow them to complete their senior semester, but ask them to pay tuition. And so this would allow us to not uproot a senior in their last semester of high school. And so for us in a block schedule, this would be any time after mid-January that we would provide this accommodation. And then the remaining information is being removed as we've had a lot of confusion for families reaching out to the district, especially following a Carson Valley placement. And we want to make sure that we eliminate that confusion. In order to more equitably answer questions regarding students, and remaining enrolled at the district, we've removed the additional options. And this policy still contains language which allows families to register as support gratis. And that is for those who are living with a district resident who is acting as their guardian for the school year. These students are permitted under Pennsylvania State Code to register and attend school without the need for guardianship paperwork. And all students who register under this pathway are subject to a residency investigation. So essentially what these revisions do are continue to allow us to admit students who may have significant need in in their family situations, but allow us to investigate those families and make sure that we are enrolling students who should rightly have the right to be with us. And then it also allows us to maintain residency for students who are in their last semester of high school, provided they've been with us for some time. And then you see the delegation of responsibility. We would report to the board the enrollment of any non-resident students so that you would be aware if we are allowing for some of these enrollments. So if I go back to the top, you're going to see a number of revisions. Those at the top allow us to follow law and court order and board policy with regard to non-resident students. It also is clear that we are not responsible for transportation. And then if you see in the middle section, we are answering the revisions relative to military families and support gratis, as is required by code at this point. And then we are modifying the prospective residence section and eliminating the areas that have been a point of confusion, in particular for our Carson Valley students. And then finally, we're allowing our second semester seniors to stay with us, either with or without tuition. So this is the most substantive set of changes for any of the policies today. Are there any questions or concerns or comments about these changes?
I have none at this time.
Okay, thank you, Sharon. None at this time. Amy, anything for you?
I don't have any questions either.
Okay, all right. And the third policy in the 200 level, there's actually 4 in total, is really primarily, this is policy 217. Essentially, this allows us to provide a diploma posthumously for veterans who meet the requirements, or to include veterans as eligible for a diploma. It also allows us to facilitate, because of this interstate compact on education opportunity for military children, it allows us to honor and recognize honorably discharged eligible veterans who left school prior to getting their diplomas. So it's a really nice interstate compact that has been created for military veterans and children. And then you can also, so that's the main change. And then above, you'll see that we want to make sure that we are including language that supports that we can deny participation in the graduation ceremony when personal conduct warrants it. And then we can allow a student to graduate in a timely manner if they are experiencing educational instability. So you see some recurring themes in some of these 200 level policies. And those would be all of the changes. So there's the military families, and then the allowance of the district to hold out a student from the ceremony, which is by law considered a privilege and not a right for students if there is personal conduct that warrants it. This would be a significantly severe disciplinary incident that would allow us to remove a student from the graduation ceremony. Are there any questions about 217? Amy, I see you nodding your head no. Sean, anything?
No, I have no question. But I guess the school activity to the previous policy, if you don't mind. I just wanted to make certain that in terms of that would be eligible to receive or just enroll in the school district for another year. Is there a specific terms of that? I presume there's not do those in the terms now that would have prevented them from being enrolled to the school district at this time, or no?
Sean, you were fading in and out a little bit, but I think your question, tell me if I'm correct. I think your question is, if a student is staying with us for their second semester of senior year to complete their diploma, will they be able to participate in the ceremony? And the answer is yes. And I might.
Okay, yes. And then additionally, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, please, I'm trying to hear you because your
Can
sound
you
is
hear me?
not entirely clear.
I know my network keeps cycling, so I'm trying. Anyway, the question is that are there any students now that have situations where they are not able to participate or be enrolled in the school district, or any students in the area now that are having that issue?
No, not to my
That this
knowledge.
like proactive or just say we'll take care of. Okay, all right, great. Thanks.
To my knowledge, I think I heard your entire question. No, we do not have any students who currently we are concerned about their ability to fully participate. Okay, thank you. Okay, and if it's easier, you can always put your question in the chat and I'll read it aloud, Sean, if we're having trouble with your sound. Okay, and then 254, this is educational opportunity for military children. And essentially, this is the policy that goes along with that new interstate compact and essentially allows military families, as they are moving around the country, to maintain educational stability for their children. And so you can see here if the children of military families, if they are school aged, they are eligible to retain their enrollment. You can see here it does not include inactive members of the National Guard and military reserves, members of the uniformed services who are retired, veterans, except as otherwise stated in the policy, and other Department of Defense personnel, or federal civilian or contract employees. So they're pretty clear about the way in which this interstate compact works. These are uniformed services, and you see that checked off. It says clearly what that means. And then essentially it allows us to provide the support to those families to make sure that the students have stable educational opportunities. There are some requirements there, obviously, to show us that they are in fact in the military. And then I work, essentially my designee is Dr. Lutz in ensuring that as students are enrolled, we know for sure that they're meeting these requirements. Are there any questions about this is the only new policy, this is policy 254.
I don't have any questions.
Okay. So we have 3 revised policies, 200, 202, and 217. And then we have 1 new policy in policy 254 in the 200s. All right. Okay, so I'm going to shift things over to the 600s, and I'm going to bring up policy 610, and Kara Green is going to explain what's happening with this policy.
Sure. Good morning, everyone. So policy 610 is purchases subject to bid. We get guidelines from the state Department of Labor identifying on certain supplies and services and goods, the bidding thresholds and how we have to handle that. Each year, January, this Department of Labor provides us with an update of those threshold limits. So they normally change each year. So what we've done in this policy, we've adjusted the wording to include minimal and maximum threshold levels instead of the actual dollar amount. Because if we keep the dollar amount in here, each year we're coming back to the policy committee asking for an update just to change the threshold limits. So we put language in here to cover us that it's based on the threshold limits that are released annually by the Department of Labor. That's the crux of the changes in this policy. Are there any questions about that?
No, Kara, but I think it's a good idea to put that wording in so you don't have to change it all the time.
Okay. Perfect. That's all for this policy. The next policy, I believe, is 626. This policy is, it addresses procurement, fiscal compliance for federal purchases using grant money for federal purchases. So there's some guidelines that you have to follow. It's very similar to the guidelines that we have established within the district. But this gives meat to it to ensure that we're following practices so that when we have when we have federal dollars, we are following those compliance measures. All we're doing here to this one is we are adding this document. If Dr. Yannicone, if you can kind of scroll through, the meat of this document basically delegates oversight of purchasing methods. It identifies myself as the business manager of making sure that those methodologies are implemented. It goes on to talk about, you see the check boxes. It talks about the use that we have use of electronic POs. And then it also talks about contract review, which is under the authority of myself, the solicitor, Dr. Yannicone, and ultimately the board when we bring it for approval. So this just outlines those procedures and practices. It's an attachment to the policy just to show the methodology in which we use for purchasing and contract review when it comes to federal purchasing and use of funds. Are there any questions about this?
I don't have any questions. Thank you.
No.
This is a long document, which I will attach in an email follow-up to you with minutes so that you'll be able to review it as closely as you like prior to the April 16th board meeting where we would put this attachment on the agenda. But you know, as Kara indicated, essentially this is demonstrating our existing practices. Are there any other questions about this document? It's a 16-page document, so we'll give you some time. We have a good week and a half to review this prior to the board meeting.
Okay, that's all I have for that policy.
Thanks. Sean, I'm sorry, did you have a question?
No, I do not.
Okay, all right, thank you. All right, and then the next policy is why Mr. Bray is here. This is policy 810, transportation. And we have made several changes. Nate, do you want to speak just briefly about the top section here and what we're looking to reinstate in the policy?
Sure. So when we, a year or two ago, updated to the current board policy, we inadvertently omitted the actual distances by which we have always considered students eligible. So this, while a change to the new policy, is not actually a change in past practice or a change from the former board policy before it. It is just adding the exact same language that fell in the former policy back into current policy. That's defining the eligibility and who is eligible for transportation versus who would be considered a walker.
Are there any questions about this reinstatement? Okay. And then Nate, do you want to speak a little bit about this particular section of the authority?
Sure. Yep. So this is just adding a link out to a newer law in Pennsylvania. They have changed the way stop arm enforcement can take place, which is when somebody passes a stopped school bus with its red lights flashing. So this is just adding some language if we choose to use an updated version of the law that relates to schools, or I'm sorry, to motorists passing a stopped school bus. At the present time, it would not be applicable to the way we operate the transportation department, as we do not actually use the new clause in the law itself. We are still using the law as it has existed prior.
So essentially, we have the flexibility to use it in the future by adding this, but we want to be clear with you as the committee that we are not currently utilizing that stop arm. Are there any questions about these amendments to 810? Amy, I see you shaking your head no. Sean, are you okay with that?
So you have a question. Hopefully you can hear me. Can you hear me?
Yes, it might be good for you to take your camera off. You might be easier on the audio if your camera's off.
Yeah. All right. Can you hear me better?
Yes, yes.
Okay. So question, I guess with regards to policy, well, I guess my concern is more so enforcement. How will this be? I understand we have a policy in terms of that, but how is this enforced?
Sure. Nate, do you want to speak to how we enforce the distance?
Sure. So basically, each year as we start to get ready for new school years, students are already classified in our electronic routing software for how far they live from school, and whether they, at that point, would be automatically assigned to a bus or not. At that point, once transportation assignments go out, that's how we notify families of what bus stops would be, things like that, where students that would fall outside of the distances, or I should say inside the distances prescribed here, would just not automatically receive transportation assignments. When we do get questions about families that are looking for transportation that live within those boundaries, we just explain to them what those walk distances are, and offer them any chance, if there's anything outside of the ordinary for that specific family, to take a look at their case on a case-by-case basis. But typically all of that starts in my office, just either by phone or email communication. When need be, we go ahead and involve either Ms. Green or Dr. Yannicone or both. And generally that's all then communicated back either by myself or Ms. Green or Dr. Yannicone.
Thank you. Thank you for your response.
Thanks, Sean. Are there any other questions about this policy and the revisions that we're proposing? Okay, so I'm going to go out to policy 903, and Sean, feel free to come back on camera. Might be easier to see you. But I wanted you to know, in 2022, we revised the public comment in board meetings policy significantly. It had been updated by PSBA at the time, and as part of our overview of all policies, we had made revisions. Over the last few years, there have been a number of state level discussions about the extent to which public comment is or is not civil, is or is not appropriate, who's permitted to speak, and for how long. And all of this certainly came out of the pandemic more than anything else. We have worked, I think, really well in the public comment period and been able to have community members feel very much that they were able to participate. With that said, this is you can see everything in bold on this policy is changed language that's suggested by PSBA for policy 903. So there are a lot of changes that have been recommended in word choice and in the way in which the policy works. If the committee and the board as a whole would like to adopt the newly recommended policy, we can absolutely do that. And I have that here in draft for the board's review. It is extensive. And so I do feel like it may warrant a larger conversation of the board and a careful side-by-side review. Hi, Sarah. Thanks for joining us.
Sorry for being late.
No, it's okay. You just got into the largest policy. So this policy, you can see the state has made many, many recommended changes. We did have our solicitor review our existing policy. And our existing policy, according to our solicitor, meets the requirements of the recommended language in the new policy, with one exception, and that is that we don't have anything in our existing policy that speaks to any availability of community members to bring in placards or signage of any kind if they were expressing a particular opinion, whether that be support or protest. And so we do have from our solicitor a recommendation for essentially an 8.5 by 11, let's have a placard maximum size that could be held by students or community members if they were having one opinion or another with regard to perhaps an agenda item that's being voted on or an area of concern for the community. So this is a fairly extensive recommended set of changes in language. So I do think it warrants a fuller discussion, either within the committee or among the board as a whole. And I'll defer to the three of you here today if you'd like to move this to a full discussion at the board meeting, or whether you would like to have some conversation now or take some time to do a side-by-side comparison of the draft policy, which you do have access to in board docs, and the current policy. And we could come back to a future policy committee meeting and take a look at this. Because again, as I said, our solicitor feels we're currently meeting the spirit of the recommended changes, with the exception of the ability of someone to bring in a placard or a poster of some kind. So, would appreciate your thoughts on this. Obviously, our goal is to make sure that the community feels that they have access to the board and the ability to express their opinions.
Mary Jo, my thoughts would be, especially because the three of us are newer to the board, and I guess I would maybe want to have more of a whole group conversation, just because there's other people who have been here at times when I feel like, at least for me, the past couple of years being on the board, the meetings have gone well with public comment, but I understand that that has not always been the case. And so I guess I would want the input of people who have been there when maybe there have been different experiences, to see if they feel like the changes are necessary. So that's my thought.
Sure. And we can do a side-by-side, if it would be helpful to the board, we could actually do a side-by-side. Here are the substantive changes to the language. As you can see, there are quite a lot of them because everything in bold is new. It may not be new in spirit, but it's new in word choice and, and description, and to some extent to tone, quite frankly. Because they're anticipating what has occurred in a number of other districts, unfortunately, and what we have, as you say, Amy, we haven't experienced in recent memory. Though we did during the pandemic have, I'll say, robust dispute, in particular over masking. Sarah or Sean, do you agree with Amy? Would you like us to bring this to the full board for?
Yeah, so yes, so for me, hopefully you can hear me.
Yes.
So yes, I would think we need to bring it to full board, and I think we do a full size comparison. It sounds to me that we're just trying to, with this policy, with these changes, we're just trying to achieve some uniformity in terms of the policy with other with other districts. Is that correct?
Well, yes, and essentially when PSBA provides recommended changes to policy, they do so based on rulings, and you can see here some references to state code and policies and rulings that assist us. That's why we did take this recommended change in policy and we brought it forward to our solicitor, because we felt it was important to have a legal recommendation as well from our own legal firm. And again, their recommendation was that the existing policy on the books from 2022 essentially has the same spirit of this recommended set of changes, with the exception of we don't have somewhere in there that's specific to protest signs or placards or signs of support. And so we did get a recommendation to perhaps create some language that is real clear about what is allowed and what is not allowed inside of a board meeting. Beyond that, you'll see we made selections based on existing language in Policy 903. So for example, we currently have a 30-minute public comment period in our statement that Mr. Needleman reads at every meeting. And then the second comment period as well, 30 minutes, and that we have each participant being permitted 3 minutes, and that commenters can't cede their time to other individuals. All of that is currently in our Policy 903, so we held those selections. In theory, you could choose a different time length, longer or shorter. And then you can also see above who is permitted to speak. And so we have maintained current language in our selections where selections were permitted, how you sign up to speak. We have included here, currently we do not have language that allows employees to speak, though the board has permitted that in the past. We do have, unless they are residents of the district, we do have students permitted to speak and then presiding officers. We do have language in our policy that indicates that if there is something that is relevant to student education, that staff members can speak and have on occasion done so. And then we obviously have some limitations to policy that are in our language, but it's not word for word what you see here in bold about the kinds of speech that is prohibited. And so I do think it's worthwhile to have the conversation. This also adds, what do we do if somebody is being disruptive? How and when does the board decide to suspend a meeting, move to virtual, which we've done before? And then committee meetings like this, as you know, we have allowed public comment at the end of each meeting. We haven't had too much of it, but we've had some. And then recording devices, et cetera. We typically do not allow recording devices at meetings. And then you can see here the note about placards or banners.
Thank you very much.
So would you like me to put this on the, oh, I'm sorry, Sean, go right ahead.
So I do have another question that is specifically regarding the placards. Are we specifically referring to petitions, or is that separate? Because I just wanted to kind of.
Yes, petitions would be separate. We have had petitions presented to the board previously during the public comment period. And typically they will either hand them to the solicitor, who will provide them to the members of the board, or they will hand them to the board president if they're invited up to the table to do so. Placards or banners would be, imagine a gallery if we had people who had a particular position they were holding, are they allowed to hold up signs, yes or no? And if so, how large can those signs be? So would you like me to put this on the board agenda for discussion, and then we could make a decision about whether to retain the existing policy or look to the new policy, and then we could make that decision at the board meeting? Is that something you would like, or would you prefer further conversation with the board at a future committee meeting?
Mary Jo, give those two options again.
So one option would be that I put this revised policy on the agenda, and then the board could discuss it, right? You would go through a motion to approve, and then you'd have a second, and then you would discuss. And during the discussion, the board could say, we'd like to retain the existing policy with amendments, take it back to committee. The board could vote and say, absolutely, we like this recommended February of 2024 amended policy. Or the board could ask us to take it back to committee for further conversation in either direction, either to amend the existing policy or to adopt the newly recommended policy. So you'd have some leeway to move in any direction that the 9 of you preferred.
I don't know that I feel strongly about either one of those. I just feel like I want more than the 3 of us to decide if we should adopt this language. That's my feeling. And like I said, for me in particular, it's just that we're somewhat new to the board in comparison to other people. And so I just feel like other people have had stronger experiences with public comment, and I would want their thoughts about what they think. So I'm okay with like putting it on the agenda for the board meeting and then bringing it up, to decide that day. I just feel like I want more than just the three of us to decide that. That was my thought process.
Sure. Well, and to be clear, the three of you would be deciding today to move the policy to the board meeting. Or to say to me, we prefer the existing policy 903. In moving this to the board meeting, what you allow is exactly what you're suggesting, which is the conversation of the full board. Yeah. Sarah, I saw you on mute, so.
Yeah, I'm glad you clarified because it was not my understanding that we make decisions here. We're putting policies forward to the full board. So I'm glad that you clarified that's and so there is not a scenario here where the three of us are being asked to make a decision. We're just making the recommendation. I'm fine. I don't feel strongly either way. I'm fine for it to go through. I personally, for me, it's less about experience and more about constitutionality and freedom of speech issues. And so in the interim, I personally would like to do more research on just sort of other school districts and how they I would like to be more knowledgeable about kind of public debate on both sides about this and where it intersects with freedom of speech so that I can make an informed decision myself. I also, just the way that this is worded, want to make sure I completely understand that people could still do it right outside of the meeting room, for example, at the entrance or something like that. We're just saying the suggestion is just not bringing in. That's the only part that gives me pause, is just understanding that everything else actually looks like what has been, what we've been operating on. It's just, it feels like to me when I read it that it was just putting it into clear wording.
Yes, I think because of the concerns that have happened in many districts across the state, in particular in the last few years, there was an interest in clarifying language, in being really careful about word choice. To be clear, whether or not we hold the existing policy 903 as it's written, or we adopt this revised policy recommendation from PSBA, you will be compliant with the Constitution and with state law and with Pennsylvania state code. So according to our solicitor, either the existing or the draft policy will meet those standards, provided we add language that is specific to placards in the existing policy 903. So what I would suggest for the three of you and for Ms. Green as the committee is that you take a side-by-side look at the existing and the draft policies and think about what each of you individually would recommend at that public meeting as to whether or not we adopt the new policy 903 or we retain the existing policy 903 with some minor modifications. In either case, you'll be meeting the standard, to your point, Sora.
Yeah, understood. And I guess to be a little bit more articulate, I'm mostly in favor of this revised one. That's the only part that I just personally probably need a little bit, like another minute or two to just make sure that I have a good sense of the landscape within. But I obviously very much trust and understand that these things go through the solicitor and are meeting the standards. And want to clarify for the record that I wasn't saying that something that you would ever put something in front of us that wasn't.
No, understood. No, I appreciate that. So Sean, I saw that you unmuted. Do you have something else you'd like to say or ask?
Yes, so I do. Well, it's my opinion. We can, if we have a side-by-side comparison, we can take this to the board for review and vote on deciding whether or not we want to maintain the current language or to adopt this language.
Yes. So what I'll do then is for the April 16th board meeting, I will put this newly recommended 2024 version of the public comment and board meetings policy 903. And in the interim, if as committee members, and I'll also put this in writing to the full board so they're aware, if people will take a look at the side-by-side, clearly PSBA is recommending this 2024 version. And so that's what will be the motion. That'll be the agenda item to approve amended policy 903 as you see it here in draft. If the board decides to vote that down on the 16th, we'll retain the existing policy. And in either case, you know, the one area for clarification would be the placards. But beyond that, I think it's a terrific conversation for the board to have in a full meeting as to the board's intention to provide opportunity for debate among board members and to present public comment in a way that's civil and respectful, but also helpful to the board when you're making decisions. So does that sound okay? That's how I'm gonna put this on the agenda.
Yes.
Okay, terrific.
Yes, I agree.
Okay. All right, so I'm gonna stop share now because those are all the policies that we have for you today. And these come out of the two updates that were provided by PSEA this winter and spring. And so our next policy meeting would likely be towards the end of the summer, based on any policy recommendations that come through the remainder of the school year and the summer months. Typically, we don't change policy heading into the summer because we're not doing any major decision-making over the course of the summer. So, but you will be having some significant decisions to make specifically around budget, et cetera, and curriculum work over the next 2 months. And so we'll make sure these are, we believe, the last of the policy changes we would have for this school year. All right, so our next, and as we discussed last year, the plan is to have 3 policy committee meetings a year, beginning of the school year, mid-year, and then in the springtime. All right, so this will be our last policy meeting for this school year. So with that in mind, are there any other policy questions or concerns that the committee has that you'd like us to be looking into in the spring and summer? At our last meeting, I did mention to you, I do anticipate an artificial intelligence policy. There isn't any in existence in the state of Pennsylvania through PSBA yet, but we will be working on it as an AI committee this spring. And we'll be expecting to bring one to you at the end of the summer. And hopefully by then, the state will also have provided some language. But if not, we're looking at the 7 states that have currently put some AI policies on the books.
So I do have a question, and that's related to, let me cut my video off so I can make sure we're clear. I do have a question in regards to AI, and that's more so in relation to cybersecurity and how our network is secured amongst the students versus administration. Is there any, I guess, are we looking toward adopting or revising any of those policies to make certain that we meet or exceed those current standards?
Yes, the acceptable use policy, policy 815, will be among the policies that we review this spring and summer as they relate to what would be an expanded AI acceptable use policy, but also a technology policy that speaks specifically to AI. So Mr. Lutz is working with his team to make sure that we are being responsive to any cybersecurity concerns related to AI. And then the AI committee, which includes members of the technology team, as well as members of the K-12 staff, and myself, we are looking at policy specific to safety and security, but also accessibility, personalization, the positive benefits of artificial intelligence as they would be applied to our curriculum and instruction, professional learning for staff, et cetera. So we have a very robust cybersecurity program right now that was put in place by Mr. Oliver several years ago. Mr. Lutz has been continuing that policy with his team. And absolutely, this is top of mind when it comes to what's next in our policy work as an administration.
Thank you.
Absolutely. So I am looking at participants. I don't see any attendees, so it doesn't look like we need a public comment period for this particular committee meeting. So if there are no other questions or comments, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
I motion.
Second.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right,
Thank
thank
you,
you very
Jen.
much. We'll adjourn, and I will get all of this paperwork to you and the full board by the end of the day today.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great weekend.
Thank you.